Okay, everyone, we're going to do the second homework problem assigned during our last college meeting, weekend college meeting, excuse me. And this one involves adding a product line. So I hope that each of you should work in a company that is so interesting that it would have such a dilemma. Because if you remember when we did the Mr. Green Tea example, they were debating, do we add a gelato product line? Do we add new flavors? It's one of the more interesting business decisions you can make, and oftentimes it's the operations people who work in the plant, who are configuring the manufacturing lines, who make that decision, or the marketers who say, here's the market for a product, or the salespeople who have to sell it, and they drive that decision, and then accountants are, if they're invited to the table at all, it's well after the fact. But if you work for a good company, they'll invite accountants to be a part of the decision-making process. And in this example, we have a really cool example of a company that is bringing together its operations, its marketing, and its accounting people together to make a decision. So the problem gives you some information related to this fashion company. And the situation is that the people who work in like operations, or I should say the people who work in marketing, think there's perhaps a market to use scrap materials to create accessory capes and handbags that match the dresses, and they think they can sell more dresses as a result of this. The manufacturing people, the people who are working operations, so to speak, say, hey, there's some drawbacks because it requires more cutting and it requires a little bit more sophistication in the manufacturing process, so there's some added costs. So basically they're coming to the managerial accountant and saying, can you help us figure out what is the incremental profit if we decide to make this product line change? So it's a fun project, and like I said, I hope in real life you ever have the privilege to be a part of one of these, because these cross-functional teams are some of the best learning experiences you'll have as a young professional. Anyway, to begin, the first step in solving this problem is to kind of get an understanding of where you're headed. So if the goal of this exercise, of this product line, is to get a 20% increase in sales, let's just put a number on that. So if we were selling 1,500, or if we're selling 1,250, and we're going to increase it by 20%, our new norm is going to be 1,500 dresses. So that's the first step to solving that problem, just putting down what number of dresses are we going to sell. The second step is, okay, we have different margins based on whether it's dresses, accessory capes, or handbags, and we're going to sell different amounts based on demand. So let's use that marketing information that we got about how much we should expect to sell. So remember, in the problem, they say complete sets of dresses, handbags, and accessory capes are going to comprise 70% of sales. So let's take our total number times 70% to come up with the number of dresses, accessory capes, and handbags that we're going to sell. So marketers also said we're going to sell dresses with accessory capes on 6% of occasions. So to satisfy that demand, we need 90 dresses, which is essentially 1,500 times 6%. And that'll give us 90 accessory capes to match. If we did just the dress and handbag, that's going to be 15% of our sales. So again, 15% times 1,500 gets us 225 dresses and an equal number of handbags. And the dress only would be 9% of sales. So 9% times 1,500 gives us a 135. So again, these foot down to the total number of dresses, which ties to what we started out with. All the percentage totals sum to the sum of our whole, because remember, percents are just parts of a whole. And right now we have solid numbers for the number of dresses we would sell, the number of accessory capes, and the number of handbags. So that's our second step. Our third step is to say, is to kind of back out unit sales of additional items are not included. So if we're to just keep the status quo, we would have basically the differential between our original sales base selling only dresses, so that's 1,500 of our new sales total minus our old sales total of 1,250. So we'd be selling incrementally 250 more additional dresses. And then since we weren't selling capes or handbags before, this product line change would be all incremental upside, as I used to call it in the business. Next, we're going to take those incremental sales numbers, so these are unit sales numbers, and we're going to take them and multiply them by the dollar amount of contribution margins per unit. And so these numbers were given to you in the problem. They gave you selling price and the unit cost. So that gives you your total incremental contribution margin. And that sums in total right here to $68,712. So that gets us to a good spot, but we're not done yet. Like the operations guys were telling us, there's an incremental cost. So we have to take the incremental cost into consideration. So the additional cutting cost is calculated as follows, based on the $1,500 dress total times the numbers provided in the problem. There's the additional material cost, because not all of the handbags and capes can be manufactured from scraps. There's the lost remnant sale. So we're foregoing the income that we were getting when we used to sell our scraps. So it's a deductive item. We're going to take that into account. And then there's the incremental cutting for the extra dresses. So that's an additional labor cost and manufacturing cost. So at the end of the day, you have additional contribution margins of $68,712. You have additional costs of $56,576. So the difference between your incremental contribution margin and your incremental cutting or costs equals your incremental profit of $12,136. So pause the video now and just go over this and make sure you got your numbers right, make sure your approach was right, understand where you made some missteps, see how they framed up the problem, see how it compares to what you did, and then we'll go on to part 2. So part 2 asks what qualitative considerations should be taken into account when making this decision. And as you've heard me say multiple times now, I want everyone to think not just as number crunchers, not just as accountants. I want you to master the quantitative aspects of these problems, but I also want you to think more broadly about the qualitative aspects of these problems. So if you were advising this team, there's a couple of qualitative considerations that you should raise. And the first would be all the quantitative work that you're doing here, all the number crunching, is highly dependent on estimates. So the 2 estimates in particular is this 20% increase. How sure are we that that's going to happen? Is that an off-the-cuff number, or is that something that has been tested, vetted, sampled, or whatnot? So you'd be wise to say, this analysis you're doing is at risk if that 20% number is significantly off. Similarly, this analysis is completely dependent on these figures, the percent of total here, that forecast sales demand for the complete sets, for just the dress, for just the dress with a cape, for just the dress with a handbag. If these percentages are significantly off, your analysis might just be a moot point. So it's wise to, as an accountant in the room at this decision-making table, you'd really be wise to say, hey, how confident are we in these numbers? Because your number crunching depends on it. So if you think back to that Mr. Green Tea video, think back to when the young guy Michael was just throwing numbers off the cuff and how that came back to haunt them. You'd be wise in this decision-making process to scrutinize this 20% forecasted increase and these demand estimates. So again, these are some of the qualitative considerations. I would encourage you to include qualitative considerations along with your quantitative number crunching, both for this homework problem, for the assessment, for this class, and as you go forward in your accounting coursework.